Good afternoon. My name is Meng. I'm from Design Plus Code. And today I'm going to try a new format, which is to review a lot of designs from the audience and also from my team. So hopefully together we're going to learn some of the techniques and how to give feedback, how to receive feedback, but also what are some of the small things you can do to improve your design. For those who are not familiar with design, I think it's important to get like a sense of what UI design is. So if you're new to UI design, definitely start with some of the key resources, such as the human interface guidelines provided by Apple. Definitely know about the platform that you're designing for, such as macOS, iOS, watchOS, tvOS, Android, web. And in each of these places, you have a very thorough way of learning depending on what you're focusing on. So if you're focusing on visual design, there's definitely a lot of great information. Now, I understand this is really scary at first, which is why we are doing this live stream right here. If you're designing for Android, material.io, very awesome set of documentation around colors, components, icons, and all of these things. If you want to focus like on a user experience and the architecture of your design, definitely go and check out the different UI patterns. One example is mobbin.design, which is really great. You can search by categories and also, different use cases and different types of screens, such as filter by patterns, logins, setups, signups, and maybe not for this one, but let's say I'm gonna go here, filter by category or by patterns. So here you can filter by patterns, yet again, launch screen or a sign up or a login. It's really important to study all of these kind of patterns so that you don't fear starting from scratch and you get the proper reference, if you will, like the proper guidance to design the screen that you want. And this really goes a long way because a lot of designers have a fear of starting from blank. I've worked with a lot of UI designers who are junior, and as you will see, you're gonna see that it's very I'm gonna try to kind of guide you at the same time. If you want to work more on the creative side, so if you are very creative and, I think it's important at the beginning to experiment and not worry too much about the constraints. I think Dribble and Instagram are really good resources because they're very polished and very kind of focused on aesthetics, animations, and things like that. The kind of things that you feel that the first impression is really going to help you kind of get started in design. But as you will figure out later, as you get better in UI design, you will notice that most of these UI designs are not necessarily realistic in the real world, which is why I would say going between this and Mobbin is a good way to see two sides of the coin. So don't focus on just Dribble and Instagram. Also focus on the patterns, on the UX, and on the documentations. I know it's really exciting and tempting to go and look at these beautiful colors and designs, but stay with me on this one. Most companies are not gonna necessarily just look at the aesthetics. They're gonna ask you, why did you make this decision? Why did you make this font size? There are many things that you have to explain as a designer, which is what I'm trying to do right here, is to explain the thought process, the design process, which is equally or more important than the visual itself. So a good way to learn about all of this, which is also really important, especially if you want to work for a big company such as Dribble, Apple, or these big startups like Stripe, is to look at the design system, because the design system allows you to set the design language to respect that design language, to work with people across the team, UX, UI, product designers, developers. And so everyone comes together and work on the design system. And if you look at, for example, Pulse, you see that they have really, really good documentation about their design language. They have design tips, principles, and it's really well designed across different topics such as colors, components, icons, layout, and all of these things. Let me just make this a little bit smaller so we can focus more on the content. So a lot of materials to explore, but if I was a designer starting out, I would love to have these kind of material to start with as a guidance, because this is such a gold mine of resources. Now, let's get started. Hey, Jean-Marc. So I'm gonna try to follow the team and the comments. So we have Jean-Marc from Facebook who's here. Really cool to see awesome designers here. So I will be reviewing some designers like Surya, who has quite a good grasp at UI design. So if you look here, the visual is great. So this is the kind of thing that I would see on Dribbble, and a lot of people would feel excited to see this. But I'm also going to review this from the other facet, like, you know, from a UX perspective, from, you know, a logical perspective, from a constraints perspective. So this is going to be a really interesting one. We also have Suani, who's also from the team, who started kind of like, well, first of all, she's never designed before. About 3 months ago, she didn't really design before. She was helping a lot with the mockups, and I wanted to see if she wanted to learn more on the presentation side and also the UI design side. And these are some of the progressions that she's been through. You know, taking inspiration from Axon, who's also part of the team, who's more senior, and you can see that there's definitely a progression. You know, before she was kind of like doing these a little bit strange experimentation that you would very rarely see in design, such as, you know, creating a beach like this with very strong drop shadows. And so we're gonna look at all of these things. It's gonna be a really interesting journey, because I don't want to say that there's one way to design things. This is definitely not the case at all. But hopefully we can come together and we can sort of share techniques. Everyone makes mistakes, and this is definitely not the point. I'm not here to show your faults and tell you that you're doing a bad job. I'm here to just say, hey, this is where the industry is going. This is what companies are looking for, and this is what engineers would look for. This is what UX designers would look for. This is what the users and the audience, most importantly, are looking for. And so we're gonna sort of analyze each of these decisions, and we're gonna offer some concrete examples of what we can do. So that's gonna be interesting. Let's look at more. So we have this one, which is, I created a Twitter thread. So we receive a lot of replies from designers who wanted to get their designs reviewed. So we're gonna go through these different designs of different skill levels. And it's going to be really interesting to do that. So let's get started, shall we? I'm going to take the questions at the end of the live streams, by the way. So please hang in there and feel free to repeat the question at the end. So let's start with Siri Awesome Design here. And the original idea was that I was challenging Siri. I was like, hey, do you want to teach iOS design? And I asked him, well, do you want to try at maybe designing DesignCode on iOS in your own style or in your own approach? And so I was definitely trying to challenge him to come up with a concept. And when he came with this concept, I gave him feedback. And this is exactly what I'm going to do right here. So from a visual standpoint, from an aesthetic standpoint, this is awesome. and I have very little criticism to his aesthetic sense. But the thing about design is that it's not just about aesthetic. So let me give you an example. Oftentimes in design, you have to consider the platform. You have to consider, the cost of your design decision. So for example, if you're using a new morphic button, you have to consider the complexity of creating one. And if it's absolutely necessary, in fact, you have to consider if it's if it fits with the design language that is iOS. So that's why you will very rarely see a new morphic design on iOS, because it doesn't really fit the platform itself. But on top of that, technical wise, there are so many modifiers on SwiftUI and UIKit where you would have to recreate this visual design, and the question that you have to ask yourself is it worth it? And especially I wanted to tell Ciro is like, if you're teaching UI design for iOS design, do you really want to go straight away into a more kind of custom made and like design language that is not really respecting necessarily the platform itself? So that was my criticism towards him. Should we use a new morphic button at this point? Do you really want to set a whole language that is completely custom around a new morphic design? And there's no right answer to this one, by the way. But what I can say is that if you're going to go towards the route of a very custom design, expect a lot of resistance in the company, from engineers, from prototypers, from UX designers, and also expect to have to work 2 or 3 times as hard to get your design ideas and your execution across. That's one suggestion that I can give you. And so for me, because we're teaching iOS design to beginners, we don't necessarily want to jump in right away into a more risky and subjective approach to design, which is why I told him, well, maybe this is not necessarily the right approach to, it could be a good example of what you can do, but that's not necessarily a good example of what you should do, right? Like designers sometimes they have to stop and think, it's not about what you can do, but also what you should do as a designer. And yes, of course, we can come up with these crazy drop shadows, with these crazy inner shadows, and with a lot of background blur effects, with a lot of with a custom tab bar, with a lot of drop shadows and outline, which is white here. But the question is it worth it? And are you prepared to fight a lot of people in your team to get this across, right? And I'm not saying the answer should be no or yes. I'm just saying you should know your strength, you should know your constraints, and you should know your battles. Some battles should be fought, and some battles you can probably focus on something perhaps more valuable depending on the team that you're in. So I just wanted to put it out there. From my perspective, I can definitely see that we can have a lot of problems in terms of like, how are you going to think about all of these colors that are in this design? How, for example, you have this background that is very colorful here. It seems to be using a background blur. Now the question is, what is that supposed to be? Is it like a single background that's always coming back the same way, or is it based on the UI in the background? And so you have to really answer these questions. Do you really need to have an overload of drop shadows? Because like, think about it. We have, a big drop shadow here. We have another, big outline here, another big outline here, and another white outline here. On top of that, another drop shadow. And the bigger your drop shadow is, the more it's going to ask for performance, right? There's a lot of performance issues that's going to come as a result of using so many drop shadows, of so many background blur effects, of so many outline and and background, such as this one. Like, this is just impossible to actually build that in, in the design, well, in the execution of the code. So it's important as a designer, when you're designing, you have to think about the technicality a little bit. And so if you do that, then you can definitely have a better communication with your engineers and also be more proactive, be more efficient in that environment. So see here, we have a lot of drop shadows. And here, the question for me is, I look at this tab bar, I'm like, well, this does not look super different from the native tab bar of iOS. And because this is not so different, it doesn't have this, this circle button in the middle where you're taking a picture or you're starting a room. So is it worth recreating the entire tab bar in code just because you want to move a few pixels to the top and you want to have these rounded corners here? So that is a really good question to ask your designers. It's like, is it worth reinventing the tab bar control in iOS just to move a few pixels away from the bottom and to have these corner radius, right? So that's why I would say probably not, unless you want to create like a very custom tab bar, such as Instagram, for example. And the reason why you want to do that is maybe you want to have like a giant upload button in the middle or something like that. If that is the case, and if you have if you have a very strong UI team and engineering team, then go for it. But in most startups, to have the resources to start all of these things from scratch can be a little bit daunting, especially in our startup. For example, we definitely have a lack of resources to come up with so many custom controls versus using the ones that are available in iOS, such as a modal view, such as the navigation view, such as a tab bar, such as a dynamic type. And which is why, back to the question, try to learn the human interface guideline, because when you get used to it, you're going to make these amazing decisions in terms of like, okay, I want to make this animation because I think it's worth it, but maybe the tab bar is not necessarily worth it just for moving it a few pixels. And another thing that I would recommend is the UI kit from Apple, is to download and get really, really familiar with that UI kit. So we have resources for Sketch, we have resources for iOS, and in terms of XD and Photoshop. If you want to get it for Figma, you're going to have to go to the community here. And there's a really good one from Joey Banks where you're going to find all the controls, and it works with auto layout and all of these things. So this is going to save you a lot of time, but also it's going to help you tremendously in terms of understanding what is already available for you. So for example, let me give you a concrete example of why you should get familiar. If you're building a design tool, iOS has this amazing color picker, date picker, and slider. Do you really want to start all of these things from scratch when Apple has already put so much effort to make this adaptive to different platforms such as iOS, iPadOS, Apple Watch? Do you really want to spend 2 extra weeks reinventing this when it's already available in the UI kit, right? So those are the questions that you have to ask yourself. And that's why, as a designer, you should definitely weigh in your decisions as a result of that. Now, like I said, Surya is doing an awesome job in terms of visual, but the questions that I had for him was like, hey, is this worth it? Like, do you think about the performance? Do you think about the design language of iOS? And yeah, so that's my criticism for his design. Let's go to Suhani. So Suhani is definitely focusing on the visual aspect, the presentation aspect. So as a designer, UI is definitely a lot more about the user experience, about the architecture, about understanding the controls, such as the navigation, the interactions, the animations. But at the very beginning, if you want to start small, start with presentation. It's the easiest part. You can create, I don't know, YouTube covers. You can create beautiful, presentations for Keynote. You can create, on our website, we have a number of these of these presentations that are animated in CSS. And so that's kind of one thing that we wanted to get our designers to start, because, a lot of our designers are early designers, which means that they don't have such a familiarity with the logic and, the architecture of the app. So as a result, let's focus on presentation, right? Let's just focus on something that is more visual, that doesn't have so many moving parts. And so we have these components on each of our cores that is more about the animations and the presentation. So for example, here is a presentation of the course, of what people are going to be building when they're using this course. So the challenge that I gave to my team, my design team, comprised of early designers, is let's start with presentation first. And then once you master presentation and aesthetics, then we can get into the UI. And the UI, as I mentioned before, is more like the patterns, the design systems, the guides and the documentation, the writing, the teaching, and all of these things. So back to this, I think, Suhani, in just a few months, she managed to get from, like that, that beach here, right? She went from here to a pretty good, well-balanced presentation, okay? And I think that's really interesting. And, take your time, designers. Don't try to jump too many bridges at the same time. Don't try to create this crazy concept at first. Start with what inspires you, and start with, simple elements, and see what works. A lot of experimentation with colors, typography, composition, spacing, focus, visual hierarchy. These things need practice, and practice that requires days, weeks, months, years to master. And you don't need to master it, by the way, but you do need to get just good enough to be dangerous, just good enough for your team to say, hey, I think you can do this like more often. I think you can do this full time. I think you can, switch from, let's say, a support role, a customer support role, into a designer role, right? That would be interesting. Some of our team came from finance. Some of our team came from restaurants. So we pride ourselves in teaching people who've never designed before, and who are gradually getting better over time. And so, take your time. And the important thing is to see that there is a growth, and that you are having the time of your life, and you see yourself doing this in the next 5 years. Yeah, some very interesting concept that she's working on right now. So let's take a look at this one. I mean, for me, this is pretty good. I just feel like, the focus is probably her weakness. For example, when you talk about focus, you want to make sure that when someone who looks at this, they know, like, they're getting exactly the information that they want, right? Like, what are you going to build? So, okay, the first thing they want to look for is the screenshot. So these are the apps, and this is the, the app that they're building with this course. Now, obviously the screenshot is wrong, so this is not part of the course, and I can see that, it's going to be part of the review. I'm going to send the feedback. This is not the right screenshot. Also, you don't want to distract too much with the extra elements, such as, the red colors here are a bit too distracting. So you would want to not use too many colors. A lot of designers, developers starting in design, they tend to overly use colors. They tend to overkill in terms of the colors and throwing too many elements at once. And what I can say is that understand visual hierarchy and what is the most important aspect of your design. What is it that you want people to focus on? And you know, in this case, you want them to focus on the iPhone and the screenshot, and then you want this to kind of complement it, you know. And complement it in a way that doesn't distract. So for example, you don't want to have this red color here. You don't want to have like 3 or 4 colors here. You want to use a little bit more transparency, right? So this really helps a lot. And I'm going to try to kind of change at the same time that I'm speaking. Hopefully that it's not going to be too difficult. But, you know, you can try a more neutral color, right? So this is the concept of neutral color versus, you know, primary color. So it's very important that you get used to that. The idea that the more color saturation that you have, the more it's going to prioritize in terms of stealing the attention. So that's why the red here is a little bit too much. And instead of using that red, I would use a more neutral color. So we're going to use, I don't know, like light blue, for example, would work a lot better to not steal the attention too much, but to instead show that there's a visual hierarchy, right? So you can see here, I'm just removing this and making it a lot more lightweight. So neutral color means that the color shouldn't use too much vibrancy, which is here. And you know, you can see that the more I go here towards the top right, it's going to have more vibrancy. But the more that I go with less saturation, a good suggestion is to go into the HSB, which is very easy to see because you have the hue, the saturation, and the brightness. So if you want to go into the more neutral color, you use the same hue, which in this case is red, but I would not go with too many hues. Like a hue is more like a color theme, if you will. So for example, I have a background that is blue, so I want to stay in that blue zone. I want to stay in that blue tone. As a result, I'm going to use the same hue value and I'm going to make it more or less vibrant. So as I mentioned before, more vibrant means more attention given to it, and less vibrancy means you know, you're putting it more towards the background. So that's what I would do. And you know, remove a lot of that vibrancy, keeping the same hue, right? And like this, you're setting a good visual hierarchy. Whoops. So, okay. So as you can see now, these are not as distracting as before. And that's kind of the goal. But at the same time, they're not boring. It's not there to, you know, to distract you, and it's not necessarily boring. So the screenshots need to be changed, but apart from that, you know, to me, this is pretty good. In terms of design symmetry, this is gonna come with time as you get used to it, but definitely like you're gonna see that sometimes your design is a little bit off balance. And yeah, this is a bit subjective for sure. It's gonna require a bit of time to get used to this. So for example, you want to have your design to be symmetrical so that it feels in order and more balance, right? So as a result, you can see that this is a bit off balance because on the left side, the bottom left is a bit heavy, but the bottom right is completely empty. And when you have something like that, it feels a little bit off balance to the left side, and you don't want that. So what you can do is something like, okay, so because this space here is so empty, I can definitely like, you know, balance it a little bit more like this. Okay. And you can see that clearly this is a little bit more off balance. So we have a lot of empty space here and we have a lot of elements here. So maybe you can sort of try to move this a little bit more here, right? To create a bit more balance to your design. But these are really like nitpicking. This is not, you know, super essential, but it's gonna come with time for sure. And design is a lot about practice, is a lot about observation, and a lot of it is objective, a lot of it is subjective. And on the objective part, you want to make sure that you do take care of it as a priority. On the subjective part, you want to make sure that you master it enough so that you get to a point where, you know, this feels like a brand or a design that you can trust. Because if you only make your design to be objective and to be how do you say, devoid of risk, then you're not, how do you say, you're not taking enough risks and you're not going to get enough rewards necessarily. And so you might as well just design everything in code and just using all the controls provided by Apple. But people respond really well to a design that is new, which is why the iPhone, the new iPhone, the AirPod Max is not like, okay, let's just create a metal here and some ear, like some place here to put on your ear. No, you have to think a little bit deeper than that, and you have to think about the aesthetics. How does it make you feel? The colors, how do they make you feel? And to take beauty into function, basically. That would be the part about subjectivity. But like I said, it's gonna take time for sure. Let's go to this design here. So this is definitely a much safer design, which is fine. Like I said, you don't have to be always creating something that is super original, right? But from an objective standpoint, I can definitely give some tips here. So for example, what are some of the fonts that are being used here? And this background here, is it worth to have a light blue background where it's barely visible to the screen, right? So let me just copy this into another one so I can control it. So this background here, let me see if I can control it. Yes, I can. And I have my background here. Okay, so there's so little contrast that I don't believe it's worth having a background at all. You might as well just put everything white because there's just so little contrast. And contrast is so important in design. So this light blue is not differentiating enough from the foreground elements. So as a result, what I would do is one of two things. Either I would create more contrast on this background. So for example, I would make it, I don't know, let's go into the color mode. Let's go into color mode. See, you can see that the HSB, I barely have, it's 100% brightness. So 100% brightness is way too much compared to white itself. So you want to go to 95 or even 92 to get more contrast out of this. So you're still getting the custom background, but at the same time, you're offering enough contrast to make it worth it to have that background. If you don't want to have that background and you want to stick to white, which is very much like iOS. On iOS, pretty much every background is white. In dark mode, pretty much every background is black. So if you don't want to do that, then you will want to still have the contrast of the search field here. So then you just switch up the colors. So you're going to set this to 95 instead, or 92, and the same here, right? So now that's two ways to go about this design. Now I'm going to go to the original way, and let's move on to the other things. So here I can see that we have some custom icons, and I definitely see that there are some colors as well, but and this is the part that is a bit more subjective, is that I don't feel like these colors go well together. And yeah, this is going to take a little bit of practice to get the colors right. If you want to get the colors right, what I can say is that there are many resources that really helps you with the colors. So for example, in iOS, they provide you some default colors in iOS. And you can see that this blue goes well with this green here. And because they're using sort of like a certain tone of the saturation and the brightness, they pair well together. And that was meant to be like that. If you can also go to the material design and you can find a part about colors. Let me just make sure that I have that. I think it's here. So they have a really good color system that you should be reading. And they even have like a really good tool. So you can see that this primary goes well with this primary variant. This secondary goes well with this secondary variant. And so instead of using, colors that are that perhaps don't really go well together, a quick way to fix this is just to use one of these colors. They have a tool. It doesn't have to be exactly this purple, but for example, I can go here and I think it's here. Let me see. I know that the tool is somewhere. I just need to find it. Color usage. Let me just find it. The color system, applying colors. They have a tool somewhere. I just need to. Well, I don't want to block this presentation. But let's go with these colors here. I'm going to just drag and drop the screenshot. Okay. So we have these colors here, and these are kind of like pretty default colors, and it's part of the design system for material. So you can see that I can basically use, I can use this purple here, and I can use this secondary here. Or I can use this variant. And, it's just to play and to see what works and what doesn't work, and how to match and use analogous colors, complementary colors, and so on, and neutral colors as well. So you can definitely practice, and with practice, it's just going to get a lot better. So in terms of fonts, what is it using? SF Display. So the SF Display is fine, but you have to respect the design system, which is that if you're using a font size of 18 or 19 and less, you should be using SF Pro text instead. And the reason why is the kerning, so the spacing between the letters, needs to be more readable. I mean, the key word here is to make sure that your design is more readable. So UI display is not the correct one to use for a size of 18. And I feel like the icon is a bit inconsistent, and let me tell you why. So I feel like this phone icon is a little bit weird because you have this outline here, but yeah, we have some issue here. We have some issue here. And we don't see the inside of this shape here. So it's a little bit weird. I'm not an icon expert, by the way, but what I can say is that there are a number of resources for icons, or if not, you can use SF symbols, which is excellent if you're designing for iOS. And here we have 2,400 icons that you can just use. It goes extremely well with iOS. And so this is free. This works with all of Apple's platforms, and that's what I would do. Otherwise, if you wanna go more custom, there are a number of resources such as Streamline Icons that offers a ton of icons for your app. We also have our own product called Shape. So we also have a number of icons ourselves and illustrations. So there are many of these resources that you can use to get really consistent icons if you don't want to use SF symbols. And the same for illustrations as well. Let me just go back here. I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything. So colors definitely can improve a lot on the colors. The fonts, definitely use SF Pro Text and SF Pro Display for this one. I would try to use a large title to respect the iOS guidelines, unless you have a completely different design. But in this case, it's not very much different from a large title, so you might as well use the large title. And you know, like I said, doing something custom, is it worth it? If it's not worth it, just go with the iOS design guidelines. So that's what I would do. This is pretty good. The alignment is the alignment is good. You want to make sure that you're using the hairline for the line, which is 1 pixel and not 2 pixels. Yeah, here I would use a segmented control, for example. Like I said, is it worth it to create a custom segmented control? And the answer is probably no. I would probably just use the iOS segmented control. You're gonna make your developers so much happier than having to start from scratch, because it's gonna be more usable, it's gonna be more cross-platform, it's gonna be, you know, it's gonna give you a better collaboration, it's gonna allow the whole team to communicate better. Dark mode, typically in dark mode for iOS, you wanna have like a black background. I think this is a black background if I'm not mistaken. This is good. The contrast ratio is good. By the way, there are a number of tools that helps you with the contrast ratio. So one of the tools is called Spark. And I thought I had that installed, but otherwise you can go to the community and you can go to plugins. Sorry, it's lagging a little bit. I'm gonna go to plugins here. And we're gonna search for Stark. It's a really, really good plugin. Oh yeah, it is installed. So I don't know why it wasn't there. So let me just go back here. So you select 2 elements, the background and the foreground. Oh, maybe it's because it's not in my own file. Okay, so the text and the background, and then Spark. Let's see, I think it's plugin and I have to go to Spark. I think they have a different name, that's why. So check contrast is the command. So only the foreground layer can be less than 50. So yeah, you need to make sure that, so let me restart this. Let's say we have a blue here and we have a text here. And the question is this enough contrast? So you're gonna select the 2 and then check contrast, and voila. So here it's gonna tell you that the contrast ratio is not good enough. So this is really important for accessibility. It's you know, it's one of those things that as designers we all need to do better. And it also has to do with the size of the text itself. So if you have these, you know, a size of this small, so SF Pro, if you make it 34, you're gonna see that this is a lot. This is gonna probably do better. So 420, you know, 428.1. I can make it bold to make it even better. Okay, and of course you can change the background. So you can make this a little bit darker. And voila. So this is getting a lot better. And you can, oh yeah, so it doesn't matter really if I'm making it larger. It's just telling me that on a large text, it's fine. But on a small text, it's not fine. So it's important that you respect the contrast ratio. And this is gonna help you a long way. So as a result, we can definitely try to see if, for example, this gray color here with the text, so you see, this is a good contrast ratio. but I don't know. Let's say this no, this is fine. This is a placeholder, so it's kind of fine. You also have to take into consideration if the text needs to be read like a body text for an article. So if you expect your users to read it for a long period of time, then the contrast ratio is even more important versus if it's just a secondary text. Let's say a small text at the bottom of your icon on the tab bar, right? Like, since you already have the icon itself, maybe it's not absolutely necessary to have to have like a super high contrast ratio. And yes, you know, please keep in mind that all of these rules will be broken even by the biggest professionals in the market, right? Even like Apple, you know, if you check the contrast ratio on the text of the tab bar, of course it's not proper. But at least if you do that, then you should definitely have an icon that helps with that accessibility. And you know, there's a lot of context, there are a lot of gray areas, which is something that you're gonna get better with time. But from a basic standpoint, this is definitely a good tool for you, and this is something you should always check if you're starting out. So let's go to the next design. Maybe I think I skipped this one. So let me go to this one. Okay. This I can definitely give a lot of help, because there are many things that can be improved here. First of all, alignment. Okay, like there's a clear problem with the alignment. So if you want to help with alignment, you want to use I think it's Shift R to get the sort of line, and then you want to bring, whoa, okay, this is not my document, that's why. So let me just copy this into my own document, and let me go it from here. So Shift R, and then you're gonna drag this line here to allow you to see if the elements are well aligned. So in this case, you can see that it's not well aligned. You can definitely put the text here to be aligned with the search, to be aligned with this text here. Okay, and the same here. So from what I can tell, and I might be wrong, this is definitely a design that I expect from a developer. Am I wrong? So yeah, the developers tend to have a lot of trouble with these alignment and padding. So yeah, you know, you see that this is a little bit out of place in terms of alignment. I would have put it like this. Okay, so that's for alignment. Let's go to the next one, which is spacing. So it's important when you design to get enough padding for your design. So for example, you can see here that I only have 4 from the top, and I have 8 and 9 from the, so you want to be consistent first. So 8 and 8, and if you're setting it to 8 and 8, then this should also be 8, like this. Sorry, my camera just stopped running, so it's giving me this error. And so 8, consistency, 7, we can definitely move this to 8, and move the rest to 8, right? And I'm gonna use this as a global alignment. Therefore, it's gonna apply everywhere else. So consistency. The same here. So you should be 8 from this element. And for some reason, I have issues with trying to align. I don't know why. Sometimes you have to properly organize your elements, otherwise you can't really set the distancing. But yeah, the padding should be similar, so 8 from here, 8 from here as well. And yeah, we clearly have some kind of issue with the structure of your layers in Figma. And this is another thing that is going to come with time. Try to organize your layers properly so that it's easy to inspect, so that it's easy to to think it from a code perspective as well. So imagine this being created into a component, and also the component being created into a design system and then translated into the code in SwiftUI or in Flutter or in CSS. And so it's important to organize, to name your layers, and to do all of those things properly. So yeah, here we clearly have a problem with proportions. And by proportions, I mean the visual hierarchy. I mean, like, you know, you need to make sure that we have, you know, a prioritization of the design elements. So for example, your title versus your subtitle versus your text. So the title, for example, should be, here you can see that it's 18. That's fine. 12. Okay. That's fine as well, but definitely the body text is too big versus the title. So I would probably set it to 15 or 17 or 16. And okay, so this is for Android since it's using Roboto. Yeah, you know, like here we have a bit of an issue with the size of the text layer. And you don't want to use a fixed size for your text layer. You want to use auto width like this. But otherwise, if not, then you use the, how do you call it? The auto height like this. And this is definitely a secondary element. So I'm going to make it smaller, like 13 or 14. You don't want to go below 12 or 13. So those would be the minimum size possible. And also you want to make sure that you don't have too much information, especially text information. So we have a little bit too many elements here. You know, the question is, do we really need this icon here? And if so, does it need to be this size? You know, you can make it smaller, and you can make it part of the text itself like this. 42 is fine. You can definitely use like an SF symbol here. So let's see. We can go like for finding a location. So let's use one of these, like this one. And the beautiful thing about font icons is that you can paste it, but it only works with the SF symbol fonts. Oh, I see that you're mixing fonts here. So I don't suggest that, especially if you're starting out as a designer. You don't want to mix too many fonts. You want to use one font. And if you're a developer even, I would definitely use SF Pro San Francisco. So take less risk, focus more on the content, and I think you're gonna do fine. So 8 here, 16. Try to use a grid with increments of 4. That's gonna help you a lot to make sense of your design. Let me just switch everything to SF Pro text for now. Okay. And another thing that I want to mention is the colors. And I see here that we're using black and gray, but also we have a background that is blue. What I wouldn't suggest having a blue background, by the way, because the primary colors, especially with such vibrancy, should be reserved for buttons, should be reserved for interactive elements. And in this case, it's stealing away too much attention, but also it's stealing away from the contrast ratio. So you don't have a very good contrast ratio here. So instead of doing this, I would use like a more neutral color. Like so here. So, you know, either gray or, so you're picking one hue, we can set to 20. So as I mentioned before, there are two ways you can do about it. You can have like a background that is off-white, or you can have the element that is off-white. You also want to be consistent with the rounded corners. If this is, you know, this is completely square, this also should have, you know, should be square. So that's what I would do. So what is the corner radius here? We have 8, we have 7. I can set it to maybe 10, and then here 10 as well. There's too many things here that I just don't have time to redesign everything, but hopefully I'm giving enough guidance to kind of like take somewhere. So for example, one thing I would suggest is try to not use gray unless you're really confident about colors. One trick that I do is to use black with opacity. And the reason why I'm using black with opacity is because it's much easier to adapt to whatever color background that you have, because using opacity, it's blending well with the background. So I would go between 60% to 80% opacity. That's the range that I would go. And for secondary color, you can use like 70%. For primary colors, you can use black, that's fine. And try to separate your layers, otherwise you're gonna have to set the color like that. Yeah, you know, don't mix the fonts. This is Quicksand and this is SF. So use all the same fonts. And not SF Pro Display unless it's the title. So this is a lot better. And also don't set fixed size, set the proper padding. I mean, sorry, I mean, there's just so many things that I can suggest here. But yeah, you know, in fact, I feel like 8 is not enough. I would definitely go even 16 to give more breathing room. So you want to be consistent here, and all right. Okay, this is fine. And sorry, it's a little bit weird the way it's organized, so it's very hard to actually set the distances. Okay, so I mean, this to me is a bit out of place. This I would definitely put it somewhere here so that it's lined with the text here. So you can see that this is getting there. It's not final yet, but it's definitely a lot better. By looking at this, it feels more in order. It feels that it's, you know, it's easier to digest. It has a visual hierarchy, which is the title, subtitle, text, and caption. And then, you know, it has some secondary text, which is very small. 10 is definitely too small. I would go with 12 and make sure to organize your layers. Yeah, I'm gonna have to spend too much time here, but hopefully this is helpful. Okay, so let's go to this one. We have time for, I think we have 2 more. Okay. All right. These are not layered, so I won't be able to help, but I can give some pointers here. So this is the Android design. I wonder if they do have the background blur. Yes, they do have the background blur, so that's fine. The corner radius here does not fit in Android, in my opinion, because the thing about design, especially for the platform, you don't want to mix too much the design language. And in this case, we do have a problem with the design language that is taken from iOS, but it's taking to Android. And so this is going to really not annoy, but definitely it doesn't feel, it's going to feel out of place. And, you know, in iOS, you're going to see these rounded corners, yes. But in Android, the rounded corners are going to be a lot smaller. And it's important to really pay attention to those things. I would set the rounded corners to be less. We have some hierarchy issue. We have too much padding here. I would sort of set a maximum of 30. This feels more like, let's see. Actually, I don't know because I don't have the right proportions here. But this feels like 50 or 60, which is too much. So I would limit it to 30 from the left and 30 from the top. You need to have a bit of visual hierarchy here. So these 2 titles seems to be kind of like on the same level too much, and also on the same level as this one. So you have to pick and choose. What do you think is more important? Is it the title here? Is it these, you know, these information? Is it the main text? And what I would do is probably make this size, these ones to be smaller, this one's to be smaller. It feels like the sizing of these elements are just overblown. So I will make them a lot smaller, and I would definitely read about typography. I would read about the common sizes in iOS and Android, and you will see that you're completely off mark here. So for example, this title is way too big. It's not standard at all. A large title on iOS is about 34. On Android, I don't know exactly the number, but it's probably very much similar, between 30 to 34. And yeah, the padding the same way. So this is definitely too much padding. You don't want to use background blur too much on Android because it does not fit necessarily the design language. You don't necessarily want to use too much of the gradient necessarily as well, because on Android they use more flat colors, and so it's important to design for the platform. That's my biggest critique on this design. Okay, so let's go to one last design. This is, I believe, for iOS. This is an onboarding screen. Let's take a look at the size. Let me just go into my own file. Okay, 72 is way too big, okay? Let me make sure that I have the right proportion. So 14, yes, that's fine. That's the size of the iPhone Pro Max. And yeah, you know, like 72 is too big. You can get away with it if it's for branding, that's fine. But generally speaking, for title, which I think you're using for titles as well, 72 is just way too big. Yeah, I would reduce it to maximum like 50 or even like 34, which is the large title. And I'm not sure why you want to go with a custom font. You know, if you want to go for it, that's fine, but like, think about the risk-reward ratio, right? Like sometimes I think like most designers, especially if you're starting out, just go with a safe, good font. You know, fonts.google.com has a bunch of really good, safe, good fonts to use. Of course, Roboto for Android and San Francisco for iOS. But otherwise, there's a bunch of them. You can Google like best fonts that most designers are using. It's a pretty safe bet. You know, Open Sounds is one of them. Noto is a pretty good one. Montserrat is a pretty good one. Lato. So these are some of the safe fonts, and I would start with them first. And as you get better with typography, then you can get into the more like very custom fonts. But generally speaking, you don't see a lot of apps with very, very custom fonts unless they have a very established brand. So, you know, if you don't have like a massive design team, I would just go on a more safe route. But you know, if you still want to use this font, that's fine. But you can see that you can clearly make the title to be bolder, to have better readability. So I can set this one to bold. Okay, this looks much better now. And this title 18 is fine. This text at 18 is fine. 17 is the standard for body text on iOS. Let's go back here. Yeah, consistent sizing. You want to make sure that your frame is the same frame size everywhere. Yeah, a good proportion of buttons. In this case, 60 is a little bit big, in my opinion. Especially in this specific scenario, I would respect the 44 size is a normal size for most buttons. And again, if you go to any of like these UI kit, it's gonna give you a pretty good sense of the proportions. Take your time and really study, you know, a sense of proportions, visual hierarchy, colors, spacing. Where's the button? I'm trying to find a button. Okay, so we have a button here. 47. Typically it's 44, but 47 is pretty good. Um, and also another fun thing about the UI kit here is that it also provides the color styles and it provides the text style. And that's definitely what I would use. So if you do have Figma, for example, you can set, you know, if you're part of the team. So let me go to my document here. I'm going to go to assets. I'm going to go to the team library. So if you do have a team library, you can enable, well, you can publish, first of all, the library that you're downloading from the community. And then you go to you know, you publish this to your team libraries. And as a result, when you start a new document, you can enable it. And when you do enable it, then you can get the design system, right? So I can go to the assets for that library here, and I can bring, you know, an alert. I can bring an app clip, right? To give me a good sense of design and consistency across the platform, like the button sizes, the text sizes. And please, if you're starting out, use dynamic type. Always use dynamic type. Developers, designers, it's right here, okay? Look, I'm gonna click here, caption 1, footnote, subhead, title 1 to title 3, and then large title. So if I apply it to large title, oops, here, okay, so they do have different accessibility options. So let me go to the regular one. Where, okay, large default, right? So get the large title bold, and there you go. This is the large title in iOS, and this is literally 2 lines of code in SwiftUI, and so it's gonna make your developers so happy when you do that. And also the thing about dynamic type is that it responds to accessibility options from your user. So for a lot of people, if they change the general font size of iOS, it's going to be applying automatically to the dynamic type of the app itself. So which is why it's important for both designers and developers to work together around a common design system for iOS. And dynamic type is just one of those things that is so essential for iOS design. So let's see if I'm missing anything. So yeah, the size for the button, the size for the titles, which is way too big, and you know, if you're using a custom font, the consistency of your images to use the same frame size. You know, you also get like some of these controls from the UI kit. You don't need to start it from scratch, and I believe that, excuse me, they do have something like dots. I don't know if it's dots or pagination. I believe it's called pagination, if I'm not mistaken. But if not, they do have this in the design, in the UI kit of iOS. So you don't need to start this from scratch as a designer. There's a lot of things you would be surprised that you do not need to start from scratch, such as, you know, this pagination indicator. Unless, of course, you want to create some crazy animation. For example, you want this to be a water bubbly that animates from one to another. That's fine. If you want to create something custom, you have the resources, you have the experience, you have the know-how. That's fine. But from the beginning of this live stream, I said, you know, make sure it's worth it. Make sure it's custom enough. Make sure you have the resources. Okay, so yeah, you know, definitely try to align elements. Visual hierarchy, so this to have its own size. This is 24, is too big for the body text. I would use 17, maximum 20. Try to use more bold in your title so that it's more readable. This font, to be honest with you, it's a bit hard to read, especially for the body text. So to me, your users might have a hard time reading this text. When it's bigger, that's fine. But when it's smaller, it feels a little bit hard to read, which is why we have these SF Pro text that is made and designed to be readable. Yeah, some padding, you know, when you have a good framing, you're gonna have like a consistent padding across your illustrations against your container here. Again, tab bar. Is it worth it to create a custom tab bar? Do you want to make your developers' life like hell, or, you know, or maybe you can just go with the non-custom one that is super easy to use. So let's go to my file here. Let's say I start a new design, and I'm gonna go to assets, and I believe we have a tab bar here. And so I can just bring that, boom, that's it, you know? And then I can easily change the, you know, here we have variants. I don't know how I disable this purple thing, but it's not part of the design. We have variants, which means that you can set to 3 tabs, to 4 tabs. You can have light mode, dark mode. See, like everything is already done for you. Is it really worth it to start from scratch? And on top of that, in code, this is 2 lines of code. It's a simple tab view. It works cross-platform for iOS, for Android, not for Android, but for the Mac, for, you know, for the iPad. Is it worth going with a custom design like this? You know, are you gonna push it so far away where, I don't know, you wanna animate this, you wanna have like a very custom middle button, you want to, you know, you have the resources to do so, but if not, please just go with the native one. It's gonna save your team a lot of time. And the same with the, I think I can change here. So the icon, is it using SF symbol? I don't think it's using SF symbol, but in the sketch library, you can change the SF symbol quite quickly. But yes, that's what I would do if I was starting out. Okay, so we have some time here to answer some questions. Let me just go through some of the conversations. All right, the first question. All right. I would like to make an app for a Mac, but it would have local data. It's an app for personal use. Do I need a paid membership? And does it need to be rebuilt every week? The thing about the paid membership for public, it's only if you're planning to publish the app. So if you're only building your app while you're developing your app, you don't need a paid membership. But as soon as you publish it to the App Store, then you do need a paid membership. And the question about this, does it need to be rebuilt every week? I don't think so. Depending on what you're talking about. And you can definitely use data that comes from, I don't know, like Firebase, Contentful, and these data are always pulled at an event. So for example, when your app has launched, or when you're doing a pull to refresh, or when you click on a certain piece of content, then you can pull that data. So if you do it like this, if you structure your app like this, then no, you don't need to rebuild your app every time. So let's see if we have more questions. Oh yes, we have a website that was supposed to be reviewed. Okay, so we have 2 websites here. I think we don't have any more questions. Let's see. There's a question about how do you animate a splash page? If you're referencing to iOS, the animation can be done in a couple of ways. One, you know, it can be just a plain static screen that you're loading as your app is loading the whole, you know, data and stuff like that. There's also another technique, which is as soon as your app has loaded a certain portion, you can sort of like create a view and that view allows you to animate whatever, like a logo, or like you go to Twitter, maybe that logo like jumps and expands. Then yes, you need to get creative a little bit in terms of how you upload, and then creating a new view on top of that, animate, and then go to the main content. So that's how you probably would do it. Maybe someone else can answer this one another way. So this is a format I'm trying out, where I'm reviewing and offering tips for designs. And if you want to send your link next time, if this goes well, I'm going to create another live stream. Please send over your UIs, and I'm happy to give you some feedback. Okay, so this is another one I believe that was sent to me. So this is pretty good. I think, yeah, like there are just some small mistakes here. For example, the view all not being on the same line. There's a little bit too much spacing here. There seems to be a lot of empty spaces. So for example, this looks a little bit weird because it has like a floating logo in a white background, and it feels like this is a bit disconnected here, and the same way here. So a quick solution is to have some sort of a frame or a background that separates from the whole website's background. You want to separate, you want to group your design a little bit better. And right now I feel it's a little bit safe in that side. So for example, you can have like an off-white background which separates well from these components here in the foreground. And that's going to help a lot with the visual hierarchy of your design. The same with the footer. You can use like a slightly off-white against like a white background here. So to have a certain level of separation, a certain level of grouping your content together. And that's really important. But otherwise, I think this looks pretty good. It's, yeah, it's not responsive. You should work on responsiveness. Yeah, this is definitely another story. Let's go to the next one. I think this is the last one. Oh, never mind. There's another one here. All right, so this seems to be like a personal portfolio. This is a pretty cool animation. Okay. Yeah, well adaptive. Okay, it's pretty good. Feels a little bit big, to be honest. The text, I would make it a bit smaller for the secondary text. Yeah, this is not bad. These icons are pretty cool. Good spacing. Yeah, I don't really have a lot of criticism here. Just like some small mistakes, such as aligning your text. Sometimes the text is too big. And by the way, from a professional perspective, if you're interviewing with a designer who has, done this a number of years, what I can say is that they might take some of these mistakes as a sign that you're not actually designing this from scratch, or you're using a template, or you're not super familiar with the whole, visual hierarchy and proportions and things like that. So be careful about these mistakes, because these are the kind of mistakes that separates from you being hired or not, right? Because if you're looking for a good designer, some of these mistakes are just too much in your face to me personally, if I was to review a portfolio. So make sure to pay attention to the alignment of your text inside your container, because it's a very easy sign for someone to ignore your portfolio. And it's harsh, but that's just the reality of it, unfortunately. The same with the spacing here. So, the logo here does not have enough padding from the borders. And this is very well designed. We do have a bit of a padding issue here, but nothing like a red flag yet. This is a red flag to me. This is a red flag to me. This is a little bit, this could be better. Now, that is only from the visual perspective. Of course, a designer's role is beyond just like the visual design. Like you have to be able to explain your decisions. So let's say they're okay with the work, they think that the visual design is fine. You still have to go to the interview and say why you designed it this way. Did you create a template out of this, or did you create it from scratch? Did you code it from scratch? Are you familiar with the industry standards for iOS, Android, and web? So you have to answer all of these questions, and depending on your ability to answer these questions, you will be able to get the job or not. Okay, not bad. A little bit of opacity would help a lot. Honestly, with a few changes, very small changes, you can make this into a really professional portfolio, in my opinion. So I would just fix those small things. Let's go to the last one. Okay, so this needs a lot of help. This needs a lot of love, and no disrespect. So let me go one by one. So yeah, you know, the spacing here, you want to center within the navigation bar, if you will. This feels a little bit too much like an iOS app trying to get into a web app, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to, like I mentioned before in the other design, you don't want to design something that feels like it belongs on iOS, but you're designing it for Android, right? So those are some of the no-nos that will not give you the job if you're applying. It's like this one, for example. If you're applying for an Android design job, it would be very hard for me to have confidence that you will get the job. So the same for this, right? Like this feels to me like, okay, this feels like an iOS design trying to be a web design. And there's a lot of like UI paradigms that comes from the iOS, such as the navigation bar, the search being this big, the size of the text, you know, yeah, a lot of things are a little bit out of place, such as, you know, the centering of these elements. I would probably, because we have a larger screen size, which means that you can essentially put this to the right and put this to the left. There's a lot of empty space here and here that you want to fix. This is definitely a UI paradigm on iOS. It's not common to have this on the web. So you definitely want to use, because we have a lot more screen real estate, that means that you can get away by having a more like a layout that adapts to the entire size of the screen, which means that you can have like maybe 5 or 6 bubbles here across 3 lines instead of having a limited size horizontal scroll. You want to normally align your text to the left so that you align to these elements, such as, you know, use that red line here. You set the red line, and the left should be aligned to the avatars and should be aligned to the text. Yeah, the way you're setting these frame lines here is a little bit distracting. So for example, the purpose of these line separation is to really to group things together and not necessarily to distract. So right now, the opacity of this line is too much, and it feels like it's taking away too much attention. So I would make this a lot more subtle. So the opacity to 10% or 5% instead of like a completely black color. And the same with these lines. It's a little bit weird the way you're separating these 2 lines, you know, like this empty space. It's a little bit weird. Yeah, this needs some love, but I can see that you can grow from here for sure. Like this can definitely grow into something interesting if you remove the idea that you're creating an iOS design for the web. Just make sure that you really study the web design and really apply the standards for web design. And likewise, if you're designing for iOS, make sure that you're not applying web standards into iOS. So that's my suggestion. So we have time for one last question, and then it's gonna be the end. Are you gonna release an updated tutorial for Sketch? So right now we're really focusing on Figma, and we have so many requests about SwiftUI, about Flutter, about UI design, and we want to make sure that we really cover those things first before going into Sketch. But Sketch is definitely something that we love. We've been doing that for many years. So it's quite possible that later on we're going to have a lot more tutorials for Sketch as well. So with that, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.